The wind came first, dry and restless, hissing across the high desert like a warning from the earth itself. It lifted pale curtains of dust over the red mesas, carried the scent of sage and iron, and pressed against the single log cabin crouched at the foot of the cliffs. Inside, Clara Finch tightened the last strap on a burlap sack of feed, and listened to the roof timbers groan. Evening light stretched long and copper through the single window, touching her weathered table and the rifle that rested above the mantel like a silent sentinel. Clara moved with the measured rhythm of someone used to solitude. 32 years old and already carved by the land, she wore a sun-faded workshirt and a leather apron smeared with the day's chores. Her dark hair, streaked early with silver, was tied back with a strip of cloth. She had mended fence wire until her palms blistered, hauled water from the dry well, and milked the stubborn goats that were her only company. These were the hours she knew best, the slow retreat of daylight, the soft thud of her boots on the packed earth floor, the quiet that followed her like a loyal dog. The quiet was what she trusted. It had kept her alive through 3 years of widowhood and a dozen seasons of drought. Silence did not betray. Silence did not die under a Comanche raid or a drunken brawl in a border town saloon. Her husband had. She touched the edge of the Winchester above the mantel and let her hand fall away. A sharp bleat cut through the evening calm. One of the goats cried out again, not with hunger but alarm. Clara paused, head tilted, the muscles in her shoulders tightening. Coyotes, she thought at first, but there was something heavier in the sound. She stepped outside, the door's hinge whispering closed behind her. The world was red and gold. Sunset flamed across the cliffs, painting the dry riverbed in streaks of fire. Clara's eyes scanned the corral, the scrub beyond, the jagged rocks that formed a crooked path toward the distant hills. The goats huddled near the fence, their eyes wide and white. A dark shape lay just beyond the gate, half hidden in shadow. She crossed the yard with her hand near the holster at her hip. When she drew closer, the shape became a boy, a teenager maybe, tall but thin, crumpled on his side like a discarded coat. His shirt was torn and soaked with blood at the flank. A horse's saddlebag rested beside him, its strap broken. Clara knelt, her knees sinking into dust. The boy's breathing was shallow, his face pale beneath a mop of black hair. A faint groan slipped from his lips. The wound was a clean graze along the ribs, still bleeding but not deep enough to kill quickly. Whoever he was, he'd lost a lot of blood on the way here. Her first thought was the law. Her second was the rifle above the mantel. Men didn't wander wounded across this land without a story full of bullets behind them. She studied the saddlebag, no brand she recognized, but heavy with something metallic that clinked when she nudged it. The boy stirred and opened his eyes. They were a startling gray, like storm clouds over the desert. Water, he rasped. Clara hesitated. A stranger bleeding at her gate could bring every kind of trouble. Feuding ranchers, bounty hunters, the wrong side of the law. But those eyes, half wild, half pleading, pulled at a piece of her she thought long buried. She stood and fetched a dipper from the rain barrel, holding it to his cracked lips. He drank greedily, coughed, and sagged back against the fence post. "What happened?" she asked. "Horse spooked," he murmured. "Caught a bullet meant for someone else." "That's a mighty careless bullet." He gave no answer, eyelids drooping. The wind shifted, carrying a sound from far off, a low, rhythmic thunder. Hoofbeats. Clara stiffened. She knew the cadence of riders across open ground. It traveled for miles through the empty canyons. More than one horse, moving fast. She looked down at the boy again. His breath fluttered like a trap bird's. Somewhere beyond the red mesa, men were coming, and the distance between them was shrinking. The evening light dimmed to a smoky violet, and the first cool breath of night swept across the yard. Clara's heart thudded. She could leave him there, close the gate, bar the door, pretend she'd never seen those gray eyes. But the sound of the riders grew clearer, the echo of pursuit ringing against the cliffs. Something in the boy's stillness reminded her of another night years ago, when she'd found her husband's body on the trail home, bullet holes like dark coins in his chest. No one had helped him. The memory burned like a coal. Clara slid her arms beneath the boy's shoulders. He was lighter than she expected, all bone and exhaustion. With a grunt she hauled him toward the cabin, each step sinking into the dust. The saddlebag she kicked ahead of her boot. Inside, she laid him on the narrow cot by the hearth. His blood smeared her sleeve, warm and sticky. The hoofbeats outside quickened, the sound now a steady drum across the hardpan. Clara grabbed the Winchester from the mantel and checked the chamber. 3 rounds left. It would have to be enough. The boy stirred again, mumbling words she could barely catch. A name, Eli, followed by something that made her freeze. Mercer. The syllables tasted of iron and old rumors. Jed Mercer, the outlaw whose gang had bled silver from banks and freight lines from Arizona to Colorado. Wanted posters with his face were tacked in every sheriff's office between Santa Fe and Dodge. And this boy carried his name. Clara set the rifle down, her mind racing. Harboring the son of a wanted man was a hanging offense if the law came first, or a death sentence if the gang arrived before them. She pressed a damp cloth to the wound anyway, her hand steady though her pulse raged. Outside, the hoofbeats slowed. Voices drifted on the wind, low, urgent, carried from the canyon rim. Clara doused the lantern, plunging the cabin into shadow. Only the fading glow of the hearth remained, flickering against rough-hewn walls. She moved to the door and listened. A whistle cut through the night, long and sharp, answered by another. They were signaling each other, sweeping the ground for tracks. Clara's eyes went to the boy again. He had slipped into unconsciousness, breath shallow but even. In the dim light, he looked younger, almost harmless. The goats bleated nervously in the corral. Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. The riders were closer now. She could hear the jangle of tack, the mutter of men. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. She thought of her husband, of the grave she'd dug with blistered hands. She thought of the long, empty winters when only the coyotes howled her name. She had survived worse than fear. Tonight would not break her. The first shadow moved along the edge of the yard, tall and narrow against the moonlit mesa. Another followed. Clara brought the Winchester to her shoulder, the stock cold against her cheek. Through the open crack of the shutter she saw them, dark figures on horseback, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. They paused, scanning the cabin, listening to the silence. One rider dismounted, boots crunching softly on gravel. He crouched, touched something on the ground, a trail of blood, she realized with a twist of her gut. His head turned toward the cabin. Even from this distance she felt the weight of his stare. Clara steadied her breath, finger resting just beside the trigger. The boy behind her stirred and whispered a single word, barely audible. "Father." The sound of it tightened every muscle in her body. She did not look back. The night stretched long and tense, the riders waiting, the widow unmoving, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain and gunpowder yet to come. The lantern flame wavered as if it too feared the dark pressing against the cabin walls. Clara bent over the cot, needle poised above torn flesh, the thread trembling in her calloused fingers. Eli lay still beneath the wool blanket, his breathing shallow but steady, sweat beading along his brow. The wound had bled enough to stain the mattress, a dark bloom against the coarse fabric, yet he did not flinch when she pierced his skin. Only his gray eyes flickered open for a heartbeat, stormlit and unyielding, then closed again as if he were determined to guard whatever truths lay behind him. Outside, the night was alive with sound. Coyotes yipped across the valley, their calls rising in eerie harmony before fading into the endless hush of the desert. The wind hissed through cracks in the shutters and carried with it the faintest echo of horses somewhere beyond the mesa. Hoofbeats or a trick of the land, she could not tell. Clara's heart measured the distance all the same. She tied off the last stitch and wiped her hands on a rag. The boy stirred, a low groan escaping his throat. "You patch up strangers often," he whispered, voice rough as gravel. "Only the ones bleeding on my doorstep," she replied, dipping the cloth into a basin of water gone pink. "What's your name?" "Eli," he said after a pause. "Just Eli. That all you're willing to give?" A ghost of a smile curved his cracked lips. "I rode too far from my kin. That's trouble enough." Clara studied him, the sharp planes of his face softened by youth but hardened by something older. Months on the trail, maybe years of running. His boots were scuffed, the leather cracked. His hands bore the faint scars of someone accustomed to ropes and reins. She'd seen men like him before, drifting between law and lawlessness, and she knew that silence often had more than words could reveal. The lantern light threw the shadows long and crooked across the walls. Her late husband's Winchester rested above the mantel, a silent witness to every breath. She reached for it once, not to use but to feel its weight, the steel cool and familiar beneath her palm. The rifle had kept her alive through 3 winters alone, its presence a quiet promise that she would never be easy prey. Tonight, that promise felt fragile. Eli watched her hand linger on the gun. "You think I came to hurt you?" "I think the desert doesn't send gifts," she answered. "And men don't bleed like this without someone wanting them dead." He said nothing. only turned his gaze toward the flickering lantern. The flame danced in his eyes like captive lightning. Silence settled heavy between them. Clara poured a tin cup of water and held it to his lips. He drank, each swallow careful, then let his head fall back against the pillow. "You live out here alone?" he asked. "Alone enough." Her voice softened despite herself. A woman alone can be braver than a posse. The words slipped out before she could stop them, a creed she had carried since the night her husband never came home. The coyotes' chorus swelled again, nearer this time, as if the predators themselves were circling to test the edges of her resolve. Through the shutter slats she caught the glint of moonlight on the distant ridge, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw a rider's silhouette etched against the stars. She blinked and it was gone. Eli shifted, wincing. "If they're out there," he murmured, "you should send me off. No sense dying for someone you don't know." "Too late for that," she said. "You're here, and I don't hand over wounded boys to the night." His lips parted as if to argue, but a cough racked him instead. Clara steadied him until the spasm passed, her rough hands unexpectedly gentle. When he lay back, his eyes searched hers with a look she could not name. Gratitude, perhaps, or a warning she had yet to understand. The hours stretched then. Clara kept the lantern low to hide their glow from prowling eyes, listening to the shifting whispers of the desert. Occasionally a faint clink of metal or the distant rumble of hooves teased her senses, but the sounds always died before she could be sure. She mended a torn sleeve to keep her hands busy, every prick of the needle a metronome to her thoughts. Near midnight, Eli stirred again. "You got a husband?" he asked quietly. "Had." The single word carried the weight of 3 lonely years. He nodded, as if he already knew. "Figures. Take someone with ghosts to live this far from town." Clara looked up sharply, but he had closed his eyes again. She studied his face in the dim light, the hard lines softened by exhaustion. He could have been any frontier boy, someone's son, someone's brother, if not for the gunpowder scent that clung to his clothes and the restless tension in his jaw. The night deepened. Stars burned cold and endless beyond the shutters. Clara kept her rifle close and her thoughts closer, replaying every rumor she'd heard in Silver Spur's saloon on her last trip for supplies. A gang robbing banks across 3 territories, led by a man with eyes like storm clouds and a heart of stone. Mercer, they whispered. Jed Mercer. The name carried the weight of blood and legend. She shook the thought away, unwilling to let fear breed stories from shadows. Toward the edge of dawn, a pale ribbon of light touched the mesa. The coyotes had fallen silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Clara leaned back in her chair, eyelids heavy but senses taut. From the cot came a broken murmur. Eli's lips moved, barely shaping sound. Clara leaned close, catching fragments through the haze of sleep. "Jed. Mercer," he whispered, the syllables rasping like dry leaves. "Pa." Her breath caught. The name hung in the dim air, a spark in a powder room. Outside, the world waited, silent and immense, while inside the widow of the Red Mesa stared at the outlaw's son and felt the future closing in like the approaching hoofbeats of a storm. Morning bled across the desert in shades of copper and rose, a fragile light that made the mesas glow as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Clara rose before the sun cleared the ridge, the memory of Eli's whispered confession still pressing against her chest like a hidden wound. Jed Mercer. The name clung to her thoughts through the night, dark and heavy, and now it colored every sound of the waking day. She stoked the fire, the crackle of dry cedar loud in the quiet, and checked the boy's bandage. Eli slept fitfully, jaw tight, the faint smell of sweat and dried blood rising from his blanket. When she brushed a stray lock of hair from his brow, he stirred but did not wake. She wondered if he dreamt of his father or of the men surely hunting him, and the thought knotted her stomach tighter than the cold morning air. The first hoofbeats came like a memory, soft and measured, not the wild gallop of a gang but the steady approach of a single traveler. Clara moved to the window, the Winchester already in her hands. Across the pale stretch of hardpan a lone figure rode a mule, dust trailing in a lazy plume. The men raised a hand in greeting as he drew near, his hat brim shadowing a weathered face. "Morning, Miss Finch," he called when he was close enough to see her at the door. "It's Jessup, peddler from Estrella." His voice carried the easy twang of a man who knew every mile of these canyons. "You got a moment for trade?" Clara lowered the rifle but kept it within reach. "What brings you so early?" "News travels fast when it's bad." He swung down from the mule, boots crunching. "Silver Spur Bank got cleaned out last night. Word is the Mercer gang hit it hard. Killed a teller for sport. Sheriff's riled, but they're saying Jed's crew scattered into these canyons. He glanced toward the red mesas where the morning light sharpened every ridge. You're right in their path, ma'am. Thought you ought to know. Her heartbeat slowed to a dangerous thrum. How many men? 5, maybe 6. Jed among them. They'll be looking for water and cover. Best keep your rifle close and your door barred. He peered at her with the caution of a man who sensed more than he said. You see anything, anyone, you ride for town quick as you can. Clara forced a nod and accepted the small parcel of salt he offered in trade, though her mind was already racing. She watched him ride off until the dust of his mule blurred into the horizon. Only when he was gone did she let the mask slip, a tremor shaking her hand as she shut the door. Eli was awake, propped on one elbow, eyes sharp despite the gray cast of his skin. What did he want? News, she said, setting the rifle back on its hooks. Your father's been busy. Robbed a bank. Killed a man. A flicker of something, pain or defiance, crossed the boy's face. That's not the whole story. It's the only story I need. Clara pulled the blanket higher over him, more to still her own shaking than to warm him. You'll stay quiet. If they find you here, we're both dead. I didn't come to hide, Eli said, voice rising before he winced from the effort. I came to get away. Pa, he lost himself last night. I told him it was wrong, that the teller had his hands up, but Pa, he swallowed hard. Pa shot him anyway. Said a mun with witnesses leaves no trail. Clara froze, the word slicing through her like cold iron. She remembered another dawn years ago, the smell of smoke and blood as raiders descended on her family's wagon. Her father's hand slipping from hers, her mother's scream cut short. She had been the only one left alive when neighbors found the wreckage. Justice had never come. Only silence. She looked at Eli and saw not a boy but a mirror of her own younger self, caught between blood and betrayal. And so you ran, she said quietly. I ran because I ain't like him, Eli whispered. I won't be. The room felt too small for the memories crowding in. Clara's pulse pounded with the old rage she had buried beneath years of solitude. She wanted to tell him to leave, to take his father's sins far from her door, but something deeper, older, held her tongue. Justice and mercy wrestled in her chest, each demanding the weight of her choice. Outside, the day brightened. Heat shimmered off the hardpan and cicadas began their endless song. Clara led Eli to the trapdoor beside the hearth, every step heavy with the knowledge of what might come. She lifted the wooden hatch to reveal the root cellar, a cool hollow cut into the earth where potatoes and jars of preserves lined rough shelves. You stay down here, she said. No sound, no light. Not until I say. Eli gripped the ladder but hesitated. If they come, they'll kill you. I've lived with death before, she answered, her voice iron. Go. He climbed down, his gray eyes meeting hers one last time before the darkness swallowed him. She closed the hatch and pulled the rug back into place, the cabin once again silent except for the ticking of the cooling stove. The hours dragged. Clara sat near the window, rifle across her knees, scanning the horizon for any sign of dust or motion. Each gust of wind brought with it the phantom echo of hoofbeats, each creak of the timbers a threat. The memory of her family's end pressed closer, mingling with the thought of the boy below, an outlaw son seeking something like redemption. She tried to pray but found no words. The desert offered none, only the endless stretch of sky and the harsh cry of a hawk circling overhead. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the dry heat. Every muscle coiled tight, waiting. Near midday, the air shifted. From far across the canyons came a sound too sharp to be the wind, a single rifle shot, then another, rolling across the land like distant thunder. The mesas caught the echo and hurled it back, a low rumble that made the goats bleat and the windows tremble in their frames. Clara rose, heart hammering. Somewhere beyond the red cliffs, men were closing in, and the silence that followed the gunfire felt like the pause before a storm that would not pass her by. The first streaks of dawn bled across the mesa like wounds in the sky, a red so deep it seemed to seep from the stone itself. Clara stood at the window, the barrel of her husband's Winchester resting against the sill, and watched the horizon darken with approaching shapes. 5 riders emerged from the thinning night, silhouettes tall and lean, their horses tossing restless heads in the chill. They came without haste, fanning out as they neared, deliberate as a tightening noose. The cabin's walls breathed with the morning cold. Beneath the floorboards, Eli lay hidden in the root cellar, every creak above him a thunderclap in his ears. Clara imagined the boy's gray eyes wide in the dark, but she kept her focus on the riders. She had counted the seconds between hoofbeats, gauged the distance, measured the calm she would need when the first shot came. The desert offered no mercy. Neither would she. The lead rider stopped a dozen paces from the porch. His hat brim shadowed a face she knew from wanted posters and rumor alone. Jed Mercer, broad-shouldered and iron-jawed, his presence as sharp as a drawn blade. The dawn light caught a silver streak in his beard and the gleam of a revolver at his hip. He raised a hand and the others reined in, their horses stamping impatiently against the hardpan. "Ma'am," he called, his voice carrying like a church bell through the stillness. "I reckon you know who I am." Clara's heartbeat slowed, each thud deliberate. She eased the window shutter open just enough to be heard. "I do." "Then you know I'm here for what's mine." His eyes swept the cabin, cold and certain. "My boy. Send him out, and we'll be gone before the sun's high." The coyotes answered with a ragged chorus from the ridge, their howls threading through the dawn like a curse. Clara gripped a rifle tighter. "You'll leave with nothing but dust," she said, her voice steady as stone. A low murmur rippled through the gang. One of the men spat into the dirt. Jed tilted his head, studying the cabin as though he could see through the rough pine boards to the ladder and the boy beneath. "I aim to be polite," he said after a pause, "but you're testing a short fuse." "You lit it yourself," Clara replied. "Right on." Silence fell, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the wind combing through dry grass. The eastern sky flared brighter, painting their faces in cruel relief. Clara could see their weapons now, rifles slung across backs, pistols heavy at hips, the easy confidence of men who had never met a fight they couldn't finish. She forced her breath into an even rhythm, the stock of the Winchester snug against her shoulder. Jed dismounted with a grace that belied his size, boots landing soft in the dust. "Lady, you're protecting a killer's son," he said, stepping forward. "Blood calls to blood. You can't hide that." "Maybe I'm protecting a boy who doesn't want to be you," she answered. His eyes narrowed, catching the faint glow of the rising sun. "He's my kin. That makes him mine." Clara heard a faint scrape beneath the floorboards, a shift of weight, a breath, but the men outside did not. She prayed Eli would stay silent. Her finger brushed the trigger, ready to speak for them both if he did not. The standstill stretched, tension wound tight as wire. The coyotes fell quiet, as if even the wild feared what might come. One of Jed's men, a wiry shape with a scar across his cheek, nudged his horse forward. "Boss, let's quit jawing and take her down. Old shack like that won't stand a push." Jed raised a hand, stopping him. "No blood if we don't need it," he said, though his voice held a dangerous edge. "But time's running thin." Clara shifted her stance, every creak of the floor a drumbeat of defiance. She remembered the night raiders had taken her family, the helpless terror of hiding beneath a wagon while flames ate the sky. She had sworn never again to cower. If death came, it would meet her standing. Jed studied her another long moment, then turned slightly toward the men behind him. "Smoke her out." Two riders wheeled their horses toward the haystack at the edge of the corral. Clara's breath caught as she watched them dismount and strike flint to tinder. In seconds, dry stalks roared to life, flames leaping hungry and bright against the paling sky. Smoke rose in black coils, twisting upward until it smeared the dawn like ink. The scent of burning hay rushed across the yard, acrid and bitter. Sparks rode the wind toward the cabin roof. Clara sighted down the barrel, her pulse hammering, and called through the smoke, "Take one more step, and I'll drop the first man who moves." Jed looked back at her, eyes hard as iron, the firelight painting him in shades of war. "You'd best hope your aim is as true as your mouth," he said, and the smoke curled higher, thick and choking, as the day broke crimson over the red mesa. Smoke billowed thick and acrid, swallowing the first light of day and turning the yard into a shifting gray battlefield. Clara crouched beside the window, cheek pressed to the stock of the Winchester, breath steady despite the pounding of her heart. Through the haze, the Mercer gang moved like restless shadows, their lanterns swinging as they closed in. The fire's roar masked her soft inhale as she sighted the nearest glow. The rifle cracked. Glass burst in a spray of sparks and kerosene, plunging one side of the yard into sudden darkness. Shouts erupted, rough voices cursing as men scattered for cover. Clara cycled the lever, chambered another round, and found the next lantern. Another shot, another bloom of blackness. The cabin walls echoed with the sharp, confident rhythm of her aim. By the third shot the yard was nearly blind, the fire's light their only betrayer. A rider lunged forward, firing wildly toward the cabin. The bullet slammed into the doorframe with a splintering thud, showering Clara with shards of pine. She ducked, then rose again with a precision born of muscle memory long buried. Years ago she had stood on fairground ranges across the territories, her name whispered like a challenge, Clara Finch, the woman who could split a coin in the air. She had laid down that legend the night her husband died, vowing never again to draw cheers from a crowd. But grief had not dulled her eye or her hand. Another lantern shattered under her bullet, and the yard fell to shadows and smoke. The gang swore in confusion, horses skittering as darkness claimed their sight. Amid the chaos came a sudden creak from beneath the floorboards. Clara's gut clenched. Before she could signal silence, the root cellar hatch lifted and Eli emerged, pale and determined, his father's bloodline written in the set of his jaw. "Get back," she hissed, but the boy stepped into the thin light leaking through the shattered window, a knife glinting in his hand. One outlaw broke from cover, rushing the porch. Eli moved faster than Clara could shout, sliding low and striking the man's wrist with a clean, practiced motion. The revolver clattered to the ground. The outlaw cursed, reeling as the boy drove a sharp kick into his knee, sending him sprawling. Clara recognized the discipline of the move, something taught with love and long practice, not learned in a day. Smoke swirled, thick with burning hay. Clara shifted to cover Eli, her rifle sweeping the dark shapes beyond the flames. A single figure advanced through the haze, larger than the rest, the metallic glint of a revolver catching dawn's first rays. "Jed Mercer." "Enough," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the din. "Woman, you got the devil's own aim. Let's talk before more blood spills." Clara steadied the rifle on the window ledge, the barrel trained on his chest. "You brought the blood," she said, every word ringing clear. "You and your kind." He stopped, smoke curling around him like the specter of every outlaw story ever told. "I don't want my boyhood," he said. "Give him back, and we ride out. No harm to you." "He's not yours to claim," Clara answered. "Not after what you did in Silver Spur." Jed's eyes narrowed, shadowed but sharp. The teller reached for a gun. The teller begged for his life. Her voice hardened to steel. "I bury murderers. Ask the canyon." A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying haystack and the restless snort of horses. Clara's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Jed shifted, the movement subtle but enough. She fired. The bullet struck his shoulder with a meaty thud, spinning him sideways. He staggered, dropped his revolver, and clutched the wound, a curse tearing from his throat. The gang erupted. 2 shots whined past the cabin walls, but Clara was already moving, firing again, each shot precise, measured, forcing them back. One horse screamed and bolted, throwing its rider. Another man dropped behind a barrel, bleeding from a grazed arm. Eli darted to the porch, scooping the fallen revolver and aiming it with both hands, his stance as steady as if born for it. "Go!" he shouted, voice cracking but fierce. "Leave her be." Through the haze, the outlaws hesitated. Jed struggled to his feet, pain twisting his features. Blood darkened his sleeve, but his eyes burned with something close to respect as he stared at the boy and the woman who had defied him. "Mount up," he barked finally, voice rough. "We're done here." One by one the riders obeyed, retreating into the pale glow of morning. Hoofbeats faded toward the canyon, swallowed by the vastness of the land. Jed lingered a moment longer, his gaze locked on Eli, then on Clara. "This isn't the end," he said quietly, but there was no threat left in the words, only a grudging acknowledgment of a line he could not cross. Clara kept the rifle leveled until the last echo of their departure faded. The smoke thinned, revealing the charred remains of the haystack and the wide stretch of dawn beyond. The world smelled of ash and gunpowder, of danger narrowly escaped. Eli lowered the revolver, his hands trembling now that the fury had passed. Clara stepped beside him, the Winchester still warm in her grip. Together they watched the sun lift over the red mesa, its light spilling gold across the scorched yard. The silence that followed was deeper than any night before, a silence earned by bullets, courage, and the unyielding aim of a widow who refused to break.